There we go. Okay. So shalom, everybody. We're going to talk about this is going to be the last installment on Paul, so to speak. And I wasn't planning to, unless anybody has anything else that has come up that would like to talk about. If you do, just bump in and we can talk about that. But I'm not going to be going over anything super new tonight. But I did want to talk, and I was talking earlier. I think it's good that Jackson has been doing his series on Paul. I think that's really good, and um, to me, so many people have actually reached out a little bit and was talking about, Paul. The history we have is so bad, and he's a violent person, and he was murderous and he went out aggressive after people and all of that is absolutely true. It is. Okay. But Acts chapter 9, if it's true, changed him, just like me. I mean, the same when people are accusing, I keep getting all these notifications, so I sorry if they pop through, but if anybody is turn off all notifications or if anybody can claim those things, I can. I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I have done a horrific amount of things in my life. I mean, as a soldier, and so to me, if Yahweh can see fit to be merciful to me, then I have no problems accepting that He was merciful to Paul. I really don't. Just because I know the kind of person I was that He saved me from, and I can't imagine uh, there'd be much worse, honestly. So, in my opinion. So, anyway, I have no problem with that. But I think that Paul's fruit that he bore after the record of Acts chapter 9 testifies of uh, of his conversion. And yes, he did contend with Peter, and he probably did um, contend with James. But I just want to remind people that Paul is not speaking to the lost sheep of the house of Israel primarily. He is an apostle to the Gentiles. Okay. Gentiles are not Jewish people. Okay. Gentiles are not subjected to the Torah obligations as somebody that is an Israelite, that is circumcised under the laws of Moshe and is a Jewish person, right? A Gentile is not held to the same standard as Torah. There are Torah commands that specifically refer to Gentiles or that include Gentiles, such as the Passover uh, ordinances and such things like that. And they are, and like, who is that, Jackson? Oh no, Brother Greg just posted. Right, there's four things at the beginning to start your walk. As you begin your race, so to speak, like Paul was saying, that's what you start with. And then you learn as you study the scriptures and as you learn of Shabbat and you learn of these things, like the Didache says, you take as per Acts 20 or 15:21, Professor Smith said. So Acts 15:21, if you wanted to reference that. But as we learn and grow, we take on these things to walk the narrow path or run the race, as Paul says, or however you want to term it. But I would just really like to remind everybody that Paul's target audience is to the Gentiles. He's not speaking to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, primarily, specifically towards the end of his ministry. And it does sound like, I guess some people will really be cringing because they will say, you're dispensationalist. But you know what? To a certain extent, I would think that everybody is, because there are eons or ages, and Yahweh deals with people during those ages specific ways. It depends if they're in the land with the temple or the tabernacle, or if they're scattered into Babylon or into the nations after AD 70. But so all these people that are yelling that Paul's anti-Torah, my question to them is, okay, well then What are you going to do about the Torah now? As a Torah observant believer, speaking of myself, I'm, as far as I know of, I'm a Gentile, and it doesn't matter if I'm not or am or not physically, but you know what I mean. Gentile. I don't live in the land. I'm not a Jewish person. Okay, so what? So what does that mean for me? The same Messiah redeemed both of us by the same gospel, by his shed blood, so I can receive forgiveness. And then I can begin my walk according to the sanctification process. So what's different? Yes, there are parts of the Torah that are written to his people, Israel, that don't apply to Gentiles. And the same is said of, so Gentiles are not, to me, when people yell at Paul for not keeping Torah, he has no problems with people keeping Torah if you're a Jew or somebody from, or a Hebrew, someone that's Hebrew. But for somebody that is a Gentile, someone that comes out of like worshiping Diana or something, that knows nothing about anything, but realizes that Yahweh touches their heart, and they believe the gospel, and then they get set on that initial narrow path, the first starting as their babies, and you can look at it as we're being fed infant formula milk, those four needful things, or however else you wanted to view that. And then you begin your walk as you learn more Torah. You walk, you grow, and that's your narrow path. And that's kind of what I think about it. There's not really a discrepancy. And of course, the Jewish people those of the circum, and I hate to say Jewish, but like I explained before, you know what I mean by that. But those of the circumcision, even the believers, are understandably upset that now Paul is saying that the Gentiles are subjected and able to obtain joint promises together with the believing Israelites. The same covenants, all that, by the blood of the Messiah. That's one of the things that the blood of the Messiah did. And Paul explains, that it fills up and it shows the administration of the grace of Yahweh, of Elohim. And that's what this is. It's a secret that at the proper time, Yahweh disclosed and unveiled, revealed, and it's a truth from then till even to this day, because we're still in the same boat as somebody was in the 1600s. Say we're not in the land. There's no temple. There's no priesthood. And like Yeshua said, I think, and I think Paul is also speaks a lot about the Melchizedek priesthood, and he's not always speaking of the Levitical priesthood. And I think that he did go, because it's like Yeshua said. Yeshua said that he was sent, don't go to the way of the Gentiles. And he said, I'm only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And then he told his 70, don't go to the Gentiles or the Samaritans, go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So I believe that they did get that, their, typical dispensational, I guess, or church teaching is that the Jewish people as a nation and as leadership were given their Messiah. And as they've always done in their history since way back during the times of Jacob, when he became Israel, they're still on that cyclic roller coaster. Some believe, most didn't. Some believe, most didn't. And nothing has changed. It was the same thing there, even though they had his own son there. It was the same exact thing as they had done to the prophets, and as they had done to all of his messengers, just like Yeshua talks about that, and he tells them, hey, Jerusalem, you stoned all the prophets, you kill everybody that comes to you. I'm paraphrasing, and then that Isaiah in Acts 28, that Isaiah 6, 9 through 10, that Yeshua himself quotes 3 times in the Gospels, and he quotes it as a prophetic judgment on the nation. And we see Paul quoting it for the last time at the very end of Acts. And a handful of years after that, Israel was gone. Then there was only Gentiles. Anybody that had heard the gospel, for the rest of the world until right now, We're Gentiles. People are Gentiles, and they're able to be redeemed without becoming a Hebrew Christian or without being a Jewish Christian, but they can become and be a redeemed child of Yahweh and be promised the same promises and the same covenants that he made with his people through the blood of his son. That's one of the things that the precious blood of his son did, is it revealed the truth for us, for people after that, in a time of in the thousands of years of scattering. And no, we don't have the prophets walking and proclaiming. We don't have the tabernacle or the temple priesthood. We don't have any of that. We have the Messiah, who is our priest, and we are his. He says he's building us up. We're all being built up together. The Jewish people, the Gentiles, anybody that believes, are being built up together in the temple. And that's what the end of Ephesians 2 says. And then at 3, he talks about it's just a secret. He's not saying he's not saying the church is way better than times before. We're above them and they're here. And he's not saying that at all. He's saying, listen, I got a secret. Yahweh, Yeshua just told me that the Gentiles are now equal and joint heirs together with the Jewish people. And that's all, and that's all it is. And it's not a big thing. Paul's not saying, okay, all you Gentile people, you take your Torahs and you don't go to Sabbath, you don't listen to the Torah, because none of that matters. You just be happy, which is what people tried to make Paul into saying. Paul does not at all say that. Paul talks about you're saved unto good works, which Yahweh before ordained that we should walk in them. Well, what good works did Yahweh before ordain that his people, we should walk in? I would be hard pressed to think that anybody that was a student of the word would say anything other than his Torah. What his Torah does, right? Shows us good for bad, shows us our need for a redeemer, right? That's what points to the Messiah. It's a signpost, points to the Messiah. So I think Paul kind of is, at the time, I mean, think about it. For all that time, it was Israel, Israel, Israel. Gentiles were dogs far off. If you come past this wall, you're put to death. Nothing. All of a sudden, you got this guy saying that they're equal. Hey, they're on equal footing. They don't need to be a proselyte. They don't need to do that. They can come just as they are as a Gentile and be partakers of that promise. And everybody freaked out, which of course they would. I mean, it makes sense, right? For all the times past, what has it been? Peter, look at Peter. God, Yahweh opened the door to the Gentiles, not even through Paul. Paul, nothing to do with it. It was Peter that he opened it to, Kepha. And Acts chapter 10 is a very clear indication that Yahweh is now claiming Gentiles with hearts that believe, they have the faith to believe, are free and clear to receive the gospel, the same gospel Peter shared as he had before in all the previous chapters. He shared that with them, and they were sealed with the Ruach. The Ruach fell on them. They were mikvah just like the Jewish people were. There was no mention of circumcision. There was no mention of becoming a proselyte. There was rejoicing, praising Yahweh, and then Kepha, it says, went back to Jerusalem. So what's Paul saying that's different than that? That's my question. If Paul's guilty of not making Gentiles under Torah be circumcised, and he's telling them don't keep the Torah, then what did Kepha do? In Acts 10, he did the same thing. It's because it's not about that. It's about a relationship with the Son of the Most High, like we all know. I'm preaching to the choir. So if you look at Paul through that light, and what was he going to do? What was his mission? He says, I'm an apostle to the Gentiles. I fill up my office. I magnify my office. And he's just disclosing a secret. That's all he's saying. And everybody, that's why Peter, if you take Second Peter as being true, and his writings as being true, it's probably a good indication why Kepha says some of his stuff is hard to understand. Why would it be hard to understand? Well, because now he's saying Gentiles are joint partakers of the promises by the Messiah. That's new. That's something nobody's ever heard of before, ever, until then. So it's just, so that's where I think Paul fits. I think he fills the niche for the salvation of the rest of Yahweh's creation. For all of his people all over that had no part in Israel, Yahweh said that doesn't matter. I don't need human beings to my channel of blessing. I will pour out my grace regardless. And I'll do that because I'll send my son, and my son will give himself for them. And so that any and all that want to receive can receive. And after that, our walk is our walk. Okay, if if people are wishy-washy and mediocre and hot sometimes, cold sometimes, and kind of stumble through life, then Yahweh's job and Yeshua's job is to weigh those out. That's not us. But there are rewards for faithful service, for talents received, effort given to earn talents. You receive those back in wages, as Yeshua teaches. And as Paul talks about, he strives. He says, I stretch my hand out towards the tape at the end. Okay, and he's talking about I press on, and it's the high calling, the outward calling in Messiah Yeshua, the upward calling in Messiah Yeshua. When he, in the same chapter, a few verses later, he had just spoke about reach for the prize. I haven't received it, but I'm racing towards the end, trying to reach the high part or the mark, the end mark, which he says is the prize of high calling of Yahweh in Messiah Yeshua. So I'm going to hop off here, off the talking in the video, so I see chat. There's a lot of chat. I want to read it, and somebody else can please come on and share your thoughts on it all. Thank you, guys.
That was an apropos apology for Paul based on a number of somewhat shaky premises. But I'm not here to debate, especially not my friend. I just wanted to mention that what I had in the chat, and that is, if you follow Paul, you won't find him anywhere around Gentiles. There's just spaces here and there that he talks about being the apostle to the Gentiles, but follow him through Acts. See where he goes time after time. Now, that is one of the premises that I think that the Bible shows is false. And that's one of a few of them. But you did a great job in that apology, and I'll keep this apology. I'll get a recording of it just in case I ever become an apostate. Okay, that's all.
Jackson, you're too much.
Hey, Vicky, you have some good things to share. Get on here. We want to hear your voice.
I tend to agree with Jackson on the Gentile thing, but I do have a question. Jackson cracks me up, Steve. He just cracks me up. I have a question for you, Jackson, if I could. So, I agree that so the quote unquote lost tribes, the house of Israel, that Yehoshua said, I come only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So, they never came back from captivity. So they were dispersed. So they were out in the nations. And so after, several centuries, they would have picked up pagan ideas. Look at what they picked up from being in Egypt for the short time that they were in Egypt, right? So it makes sense to me that they were of the house of Israel, but that they had taken on the lifestyles of many of the Gentile and the pagan communities. Do you think that that is a possibility?
Well, probably not. And here's why.
Okay.
Because when he goes to synagogues and the places where the Jews are, if these heathenized Jewish Gentiles didn't have a sense of their heritage, what would they be doing in the synagogue? What would they be doing in Jewish meetings? He goes from one Jewish group to the other. Everywhere he goes, he might. And look, I'm just trying to play the devil's advocate here, as usual. That seems to be my lot in life, not to have too many people agree with me. But yeah, they wouldn't be in there unless they had reestablished their connection with Judaism. Now, I will admit that in these places like Thessalonica and Corinth and places out and about like that, that the synagogues in Jewish places were probably multi-language places because of the movement of people all the time coming in. But even at that, we understand that mainly when they're living among Greeks, they speak Greek. And even the Jews that are in those synagogues that he goes to in Europe are speaking Greek by and large. Nobody spoke Aramaic around there except in enclaves of newcomers. It's like here in Florida. No, it's like here in Florida. We see this happening right away. We see these Spanish folks, Hispanic folks coming in, and Haitians. They don't speak English in their countries, but when they come here, they of necessity have to learn. No, that's not true at all. Why in the world did Paul choose Greek to write his letters if that was like eating pigs? Professor Smith, you're even a greater apologist than Shawn is. That is like saying that the Spanish here are not learning English because they have to. Only in small enclaves did they speak Aramaic, and they didn't speak Hebrew any place except in the liturgies. Well, I think that you're incorrect there, but I still love you, even though you're stupid. I still love you, Professor Smith. You have proof? Okay, let's hear it. Oh, okay. He can't speak.
Yeah, he's in a loud room, he said.
He's in a synagogue somewhere. Okay, well, I'm done. I don't intend to try to put any more fly in your soups.
No, it's all good, brother. I was just
The apostles need to have a voice here too.
Oh, they absolutely. Well, in my opinion, they're speaking of the same. They're working towards the same goal.
Hey, I'll provide the
Sharing
receipts
Yeshua.
as soon as I get to the house. Okay. I just left the crowded room. I'm almost to the house, but I'm gonna provide Jackson with the receipts. I've got the receipts.
Okay.
Please be careful on your way home.
I'm trying, but you got me riled up, Dr. Snyder.
Well, how many times has that happened, Professor? We get
Probably
ourselves we both get ourselves riled up. That's probably why we like others so much.
That's
Okay.
probably it.
Okay, I wanna read something here. Now I know, and it's like I've said, Paul out of his own mouth in 1 Corinthians says that he goes to the Jews first, then he goes to the Gentiles. And he does speak to Gentiles. And he tells them that he's going to do it. Like, for instance, in Acts 4 or 13, 13:44. I'll just read out the King James. I have it open. And the next Sabbath day came almost the whole city together to hear the word of Elohim. But when the Jews saw the multitudes, they were filled with envy and spake against those things which were spoken by Paul, contradicting and blasphemy. And Paul and Barnabas waxed bold and said it was necessary the word of Elohim should be at first be spoken to you. But seeing you put it from you and judge yourselves unworthy of everlasting life, lo, we turn to the Gentiles. For so hath the Lord commanded us, saying, I have set you as a light of the Gentiles, that you should be for a salvation unto the ends of the earth. And when the Gentiles heard this, they were glad and glorified the word of Yahweh. And as many as were ordained to eternal life believed. And the word of Yahweh was published throughout all the region, it says. But the Jews stirred up the devout and honorable women and the chief men of the city, and raised persecution against Paul and Barnabas, and expelled them out of their coasts. And they shook off their feet and came to Arkham. So, as his manner was, it says he goes to the synagogue, he speaks to the Jews, they reject it, he turns to the Gentiles. And he tells them, I was set apart to go to the Gentiles, like he just said. I have set you to be a light to the Gentiles, that you should be for salvation unto the ends of the earth. And I like Jackson's presentation he did a couple days ago about Yeshua's writing about Paul, whether it's true or not. You know, people are open for that. I would remind people that, and I know that people contend this highly too, but slip of my Benjamin, what's somebody write it up there? The Testament of Benjamin speaks of it as well, which was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so I mean, I guess my last word on it all is I don't make a hard stance one way or another, because like I've always said, I'm not saying I know everything by far. I'm just sharing what got me started in all this was going through the Greek of the New Testament, and then that jumping out at me, and that led down other rabbit trails, and I started looking into it, and I thought it was something that was definitely worthwhile of sharing. And I was always kind of leery that it might turn into is Paul a true apostle or not? And I kind of expected it, and it kind of makes logical sense for it, because you kind of have to establish that right at the start. And it was like I said, right at the start of this whole series, I said, if you don't accept Paul and his writings as true, and if you think that the Bible, the scriptures we have that it says he wrote in our scriptures aren't accurate, then of course the stuff I'm trying to show is not going to sit well, and for that reason alone, if that point of view is correct, then Paul's a liar and it's wrong anyway. But if that's the case, then I would invite people to add, or I would like to ask people, what was Yahweh's plan for the rest of the world in the days following the destruction and judgment of Israel way back then? Or did he have maybe he had no plan? Maybe he just said, I'm just going to let mankind fend for themselves for 2,000 years. I don't believe that. Like we talked about before, read Fox's Book of Martyrs and other such writings, and you see how believers, and they'll label themselves Christians, but believers in the Son, Messiah, suffered horribly over the centuries for their faith and for just pieces of the scripture even. So I don't believe that it's just a 2,000-year dark period where we have no access to Yahweh. I do believe that Paul was sent to the Gentiles, and he was sent to fill up the plan of Yahweh, and like he just says, is to show forth Yahweh's exceeding grace to those who love him, honestly. And I think it's just that simple. I don't think it really goes beyond that. I don't think Paul's trying to create a whole new different, like a lot of Christianity believe that Paul is like they won't read anything that Yeshua says, or the other epistles, James and all that, and they're absolutely wrong for that. And we don't even need to get into that. There's no need to even refute that line of thinking. We all know that's ridiculous, and I'm the biggest proclaimer of the Nazarene Acts, is pretty much you'll find. I love it. I think it's fantastic, and I fully realize what the implications of it, are. But both, in my opinion, I could read the Nazarene Acts, and then read the Book of Acts, and then read 1st and 2nd Peter and James, and then read Paul's epistles, and I don't have any problem with it. Yes, I do.
You
I
made
do-
up your mind that there are two gospels then.
I do believe that yes, there are two gospels, but they are two gospels with the same source. They both gospels point to Yeshua. That's what I believe. One is the way, is the signpost that points to Yeshua for those that are Jewish, that are circumcised under the Torah. And the other way is for those that are not, that are of the nations, that they can be brought near also, and it's done by the blood of Messiah both ways. That's kind of where I sit at it. Go ahead, sister.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. So who I'm looking at the hold on one second. The greeting in the book of James says, Yaakov, a servant of Elohim and of the Master, Yehoshua Messiah, to the 12 tribes who are in the dispersion, greetings. And so when I looked at the Roman greeting, and I think I looked up through Ephesians and Philippians, and basically they all say, Paul, an emissary, not from men, nor by men, but by Yehoshua Messiah and Elohim the Father, who raised him from the dead, and all the brothers who are with me, to the assemblies in Galatia. And then the one for Romans is to the set apart ones. He words it differently, but he basically, when he greets Romans, is a servant of Messiah, called an emissary, separated. Well, that's particularly through whom we have received favor in the office of the emissary, among whom you also are called the ones of Yehoshua Messiah. To all who are in Rome, beloved of Elohim, called, set apart ones. So doesn't Jackson make a good point that these are Jews? I mean, they're set apart ones, right? I mean, so when you say that they are that he is the emissary to the Gentiles, do you mean that he is going into Gentile territory and teaching a bunch of pagans who, have all this immorality, and they eat all these bad things, and, all these things? Are you saying that these are the Gentiles that he's going to, or is he going into Gentile territory and dealing with people who are already the set apart ones? Because that's who he's writing to. That's who he's greeting.
Yes.
I don't believe that any scripture is written to unbelievers. People write to churches, believers. James writing to believers. We don't write to unbelievers. These, whether they're lost Israel or physical Gentiles, I don't think it matters. I think Paul's message is clear that any and all are joint heirs together if you will just believe in the Son of God. I think his message is just as simple as that. I don't think it has anything to do. He's not saying they're any better, worse, or anything else. And that's why he says another, which is not another gospel. It is another gospel in so much as you're taking away Torah observance from it, but it's not another gospel because ultimately it is just the marriage covenant that Yeshua offered, right? Remissions of sins in his blood. It's the marriage covenant that he offered. And it's the same marriage covenant he's offering to somebody today, whether or not they're an Orthodox Jewish person that believes downtown Jerusalem or whether they're hillbilly Shawn in southern New York State. It doesn't really matter, right? If I come into covenant with Yeshua, then as I study the Torah, the Ruach HaKodesh fills me up and enlightens me in those things, and I start walking in those things. Doesn't make me a Jewish believer. It makes me, I guess, technically a Gentile Hebrew or a Gentile Torah keeping believer, I guess. However you want to label it, but you get my point? The Ruach is the one that seals us. The Ruach is the one that enlightens it and writes those Torahs in our heart. It is, as like the Didache says, as much as you can take on. if you're not willing to take on the and try to walk in the yoke of as the master walk, and as even Paul and the other disciples, James, Peter, all of them walked in his ways, Clement. If we're not willing to do that individually, that has no bearing on whether or not Paul is Torah or anti-Torah. What it has to do is individually seeking his ways, and his ways will point us back to Torah, right? Because there is no other way to do good other than Torah. And so that's why I really don't see a difference in and people can argue anti-Torah, but let's just be, what about today? What about 1900 when there was no Israel and no Jerusalem, no nothing? What about then, if you wanted to believe, if you want, if the Ruach touched your heart, you didn't get circumcised and start keeping the Torah. I mean, real honestly, I'm just kind of trying to be real and honest about it here. And I think that's where Paul comes in. He's showing it's not a new thing that he thought up. He's just revealing a secret that Yeshua told him Yahweh hid himself. That's all it was. And that's and I think it's just as simple as that. The problem is the message, the target audience. It's going to Gentiles without having to become circumcised to keep the law of Moses, which is what the problem in Acts 15 was in the very beginning. So
that's a good answer. That makes sense to me. I understand what you're saying. Thank you for that.
Hey.
What's up, brother? Come on, you got something to say?
Hey, there we go. I've been listening on my phone and finally got back on my computer. That sure. I heard what Professor Smith said, and I have to agree with him about I believe the writings was in the Hebrew, so we'll get that going. And I also believe that what he was saying there we go. Hey. So I believe being the temple, he said we are the temple. So being the temple and the Ruach are one and the same. And could it possibly be what he was talking about? Because we know he went to the synagogues. He kept the Sabbath, everything that he did. Could it possibly be that he was talking about the Gentiles as in a different aspect? When we go to just a non-believer, is there a difference between like a non-believer and like a Satanist? Somebody that should we go to those type of bars, places? Could it be that that's what he was saying, is not to partake of that, what they're doing? Some people are just not going to change, and you're not really going to change somebody by going into a bar, that type of environment, I don't believe. So in that sense of a Gentile, because they all had the same concept, as far as their concept, and I don't see any real discretion in that a pagan was somebody that was just unsaved, they was unclean. So I'm wondering if that just isn't maybe even a different word. I haven't studied it a whole lot, but I wonder if that isn't a whole different concept of, when he's going to the synagogues and he's preaching, teaching, and doing all this, and then he says, these people here are pagan or they're Gentiles. I'm wondering if that just isn't what we see today. We call for better words, a Satan worshiper, somebody that's just their mind's set. They're in a different direction. No matter what you say, they're not going to change their mind, and you're not going to change. They don't even want to change, and a lot of them even want to tell you that. Just another something to throw in there and see what everybody thinks about. Or
Who told you that Paul wrote in Hebrew?
who, me?
Yeah. Where'd you get that from?
For my studies, I have different things I looked up and everything from just my studies background.
No way, brother. No way did you write in Hebrew. In fact, not one scrap of Paul in Hebrew comes from ancient source. We've got a lot of them in the Gospels, but nothing from Paul. He was raised in Tarsus, where they spoke Greek. Okay, just wondering if you had a source that maybe I might know.
I think the Hebrew Greek argument is kind of mute anyway, in my opinion. I know people might get upset, especially Professor Smith and Jackson, since they're like experts in Greek and Hebrew. But my point is this: is that Yahweh is not bound by a language. In Acts chapter 2, I mean, they were given Kafah was giving forth the message, and it said that everybody heard the word in their own language, which means the word, whatever language Kafah spoke with, which was probably, most people say Hebrew, some will say Greek. It doesn't matter. Whatever he was speaking, whatever language he was speaking, the people that were speaking that same language heard what he said in their own language, which means the word of Yahweh, the truth of Yahweh, will translate and transfer to any language. It doesn't matter. It's not bound by a language. So I know a lot of people get hot about that, but personally myself, I don't get into which was was it written in Hebrew or Greek? I don't think it really matters. I think that in my opinion, I think we have what we need, and we have what, just as whether it was written in Hebrew or Greek, I think it would say the same thing. I think Yahweh guards the scriptures regardless of the language. My opinion, though. Well, if nobody else has anything to say about it, we can at least stop the recording so there's not a bunch of silence and stuff, and we can just continue to talk. I have no problems with that. Does anybody have any more things they want to get on the audio or video for the video that they may want to share for later? Brother Greg, come on, brother.
Sure. Are we sure it wasn't the King James thou shalt? No. But yes, I totally agree that I believe that there is no boundary with Yahweh in the languages. I obviously any language that people pray in. But on that same note, I do kind of agree with Professor Smith on that, if nothing else, just to help a brother out. But if we was given that original language of Hebrew, then there seems like there's just more of a concrete to me on that for my studies. But I haven't studied a whole lot. I'm just starting to get into the Greek and the Aramaic part. But bringing everything back to the Hebrew, right? Well, I believe we don't speak Hebrew because we went so far away from the Creator. I believe until Babel, until we was split because of our own, demise, if you will, of our own sins. If we would have never been so sinful, I think we would still have that pure, true language, that we wouldn't have these different language and wouldn't be so far apart. And I think that becomes a problem, in today, and it becomes just like this, it becomes a problem of what about this language? What about that language?
Well, let me ask you a question.
Yes,
You
sir.
grew up in the Pentecostal church, which kind of tells us that you and myself too believe in the type of speaking in tongues that was demonstrated in Acts chapter 2, when we had people coming in from everywhere that speak different languages, and they were able to understand Hebrew. Now, I can't tell you that I can speak Hebrew, but I have spoken a variety of languages. Maybe Hebrew. I think I started out with Hebrew because I can still identify a number of the words that I initially said as a teenager today, and I still have those words. Do you think that is a possibility, that everything Paul said from a pulpit in a European assembly might have been through the gift of xenoglossa? Do you think that's a possibility? I'm not trying to trap you. I'm just asking you.
I think it could.
Pentecostal.
I think it very well could be. I think that to me, it's clear that they spoke in whatever language, whether it was Hebrew, maybe even in the synagogue, or some of the things that he was unlearned, or some things that he didn't know about, that he could speak in that Hebrew tongue And then we obviously see in Acts of where they spoke in, the other languages, in the Greek, and so much that they knew, it wasn't a dumbfounded language. It wasn't like a baby talk or a babble. They actually knew what they were saying. So I do agree with that. I believe that the Ruach let them speak in whatever language that they needed to speak in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, just wondered. I know that there have been times with the language studies I've done that I could understand some people speaking in tongues, and a good representation of that is listening to the script of the Passion of the Christ, which is in Greek, in Latin, in Aramaic, and in, what's the other one? Hebrew. So I think through language study, if not through supernatural gifting, a person can understand a good bit of that script, and it's really quite amazing. In fact, one time, I only saw it one time, it's all I could bear it. But I just shut my eyes and I thought, let the Spirit interpret this for me. And wow, it seems like I got it. Of course, that was several years ago, but wow, it was amazing. Have you had some types of experiences in your meetings with tongues that somebody from another place could understand what a speaker said in tongues through the natural ear? Just wondering.
Yes, there's been a couple different instances where that happened. And some, I myself, I'm not real good at Aramaic, but I've heard it. I've heard it enough that I used to, the farther you get away from it if you don't study it. But from being in Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, and some of the language, I could understand some of the words, and hearing people use, I could definitely tell it was Aramaic and Hebrew. That it's almost like a German, like I guess a Southern German. I've also heard that that deep auk in it, I guess is the only way I could explain it. But I have heard that, and I've heard and seen other people do exactly that, interpret of what they had said.
Okay. Sometime maybe we ought to have a talk about this particular gift, because one of the things that I submit that Paul gives us that's essential is 1 Corinthians 12, Romans 12, Ephesians 4, where he talks about spiritual gifts. Now, we wouldn't know anything about that had not we read that in Paul, except for the place in Acts chapter 2. And so, of course, there are some things that he's really useful for. Another one is explaining what the resurrection is all about in 1 Corinthians 15. Let me see what else. Oh, the different stages of glorification, conversion, justification, sanctification, perfection, and glorification. I guess that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different ones. We wouldn't know anything about that either. So I'm not saying that we need to throw Paul out, but I'm feeling like his stuff ought to be in a commentary of the scripture, like at the end of the scripture in a commentary, because you got to admit, his stuff actually takes over the New Testament. And we understand too that even the Gospels were redacted by Pauline people. But what's he got in there? Supposedly 14 letters in there. 14 letters. Well,
Yeah,
Professor,
14.
certainly they would at the time that Josephus lived and the place that he lived in Judea, they would discourage that. But there were a lot of Greeks in Galilee and a lot of cities that are not mentioned in the New Testament simply because they were Greek cities. And it also, Josephus tells us about all the different cities in Galilee and in Perea that the Jewish people spoke Aramaic and the Greek people were in civil wars. They killed each other. And usually the Jews lost, according to him. That is really a scary thing, to think that your neighbors and friends that may have spoken a little different language or may have had a little different viewpoint on religious issues would actually turn to swords to kill each other. That's a scary thing. And I think it wouldn't take a whole lot more here. Well, what am I saying? It's happening here. These certain peoples in a particular club, or what they are calling a religion now, the trans religion, are actually going forth and murdering people in Christian establishments and in Jewish establishments. Wow. It just came to my mind. We're in the very throes of this right now, and it could only get worse if we allow these people the leeway to go a-killing. Yes, it is.
Yes. Yes, I've even been a part of what they call security, I guess security detail, or putting security together in some of these assemblies because they are afraid of what's going to happen of that backlash. You know, if you go up there and say certain things or do certain things, they're actually afraid of what's going to happen to their congregation. And I mean, we see that people have had their churches burned down, their buildings burned down. You know, so I recommend to any bigger assembly like that to put out cameras and to have people at the doors. Did we ever think that we would have to have that or called for that? When I first heard about it, was Hector and people up in Sterling, and they was, you know, all for security. They was afraid for the congregation. And I was like, that's kind of, we don't need that. You know, why do we need that? But the more that you see what's going on, that I agreed with them and I helped them put a detail together. And actually we even went through and did like a raid to show them how quick, and they was amazed of how quick just 2 or 3 people can come into assembly. And a big assembly, I think it took us 7 seconds to get from the door to the end of it. And, you know, they was amazed at how quick and how much, you know, they was just amazed at that. So I think the watchmen on the wall are definitely needed, you know, in every aspect of that.
Absolutely. And let me tell you a little story. And I think Professor Smith was with us at this time. We were at Tabernacle Feast, and it was outdoors in a pavilion. Correct me if I'm wrong, Gregory. And all of a sudden, I saw one of those red laser lights coming in and focusing on certain people. Well, the first thing I thought was somebody's got a rifle out there. And there was a big guy up in front, that all of a sudden that laser light settled on his chest. Now, what were we supposed to think?
Right.
Well, we thought there's a rifle out there and somebody's going to assassinate this big guy or the rest of us. And so the meeting went into an uproar, and we sent people out to go find out where this was coming from. And it was from a guy who was out in the next field using a red laser pen. But what do you think we would think about seeing that? We would have to be so-called up in arms because, well, I thought rifle. And so I'm sure other people. Gregory, did you see that, or were you there that time? If you're still there? Yeah. Yes, you were there. Good. Well, there's a witness to that. It could have been a rifle. This guy, knowing him a little bit, if he had a rifle, it would have probably been a rifle. But certainly he had it in mind to disrupt the meeting with that. What else? I think that every meeting ought to have armed people there in the group. And wherever we've gone, we've always had at least one armed person to stick around all the time, just in case. So, Hosapple, you were part of a security team for a church, did you say?
Yes.
Oh, okay, that's good. It would be great if you could divulge some of the mysteries of security in situations like that, because surely we're going to have some more feasts like next October, if we can get anybody to go. And that's something that we need to know about.
Security cameras is what we came up with. Some of the cheaper security cameras that you can watch, and the people at the front door. We put 2 people at the front door and somebody at every exit, especially if there was a feast day or a big gathering. Then we had somebody at each door. We even went so far as got walkie-talkies, because the back doors you couldn't talk to them. So we got some walkie-talkies, and where they could communicate, and made sure the back doors was locked. Do a little roving guard, especially for feast and things like that. And the roving guard, his duty was to go check the doors, make sure they was locked and nobody was in between there. And there was also people that with inside that we identified. Some people had family problems. Some of their children, 15, 16, 17-year-old children, had issues. So they was identified as people to watch within the assembly. So the roving guards kind of watched for them and the family members, because when family members start squabbling, fighting, you never know what's going to happen. So they was just kind of identified as people to watch. And then, of course, the ones at the doors watch the outside. We put cameras on the parking lots, and that way you could communicate with each other and let each other know. Because like I said, we just, they wanted to see what would happen. So I gave it to them, I was like, okay, you may not like this, but it wasn't with the full congregation. It was only the members of the security team, but we had, I think, 7 to 15 people. And there was 3 of us that went through the whole team and basically smashed them in 5 to 7 seconds. And they realized that somebody just pulling up in a car could do terrible, terrible damage in seconds. And so we proved that. We proved the reason for having a security team, and how to just watch for those exits, watch for the parking lot. And just like you said, that somebody could be across the field or across the road and have a weapon or have something. So we even went out outside and had people that would go around the building to look for this as well. And of course, if anybody went outside on feast days, Sukkot, children outside playing, then there had to be somebody out there to watch the whole area to help them too, because kidnapping or, anything could happen. So that's what we incorporated through it all.
We only had one time when there was somebody that came in, and it so happened the guy that was guarding was out somewhere, and I had the gun. So I just, watching TV, how you clear rooms. I tried doing that. The guy wasn't there, but it was verified that he came on. We don't know what he was doing there, but he was going through the women's dormitory. That's another, I think, Brother Smith, you were there at that one too. Yes. It's a good thing. Since I saw you in your gorilla outfit, I knew you were the man. This turned out to be a good session.
Yeah, it sure did. That's good.
Mhm.
Does anybody else have anything they want to say before we shut it down? Oh, Fine must have got kicked offline. He's coming back. Well, thank you. And that's about all I have to say about Paul. There's really nothing else that I can that I got. I mean, I kind of put it all out. If you haven't, I would invite. If you haven't watched the sessions we've done about the stuff, please check it out. Let me know what you think. And I like to plug Jackson's stuff. His series on Paul, all parts of them are really, really are good, and they're worth watching because they're very profitable. Because if nothing else, it shows us, in my opinion, the mercy of Yahweh. Because if he can have mercy on such a person such as that, it gives us all hope. So,
Well, that's for sure. That's for sure.
all
Thank
right.
you for hosting. Very good.
Thank you, brother. All right. We'll see you guys soon, and Yahweh bless you all.